freezing winter night in the Iowa wilderness. Snow falling thick and fast, blanketing the world in silence. A retired soldier, now a volunteer with AK-9 search team, trudges through the drifts, his German Shepherd Scout pulling hard against the leash. They're on a routine training mission. But Scout suddenly freezes, nose to ground, refusing to budge near a crumbling cabin. The soldier's heart races. Something's wrong. What he finds inside those rotting walls will shatter his stoic resolve, leaving him sobbing in the snow, forever changed by a truth too devastating to bear. The wind howled through the skeletal trees, carrying flecks of snow that stung Daniel Harper's weathered face. At 42, the retired Army veteran was no stranger to harsh conditions, but this Iowa winter felt personal, biting deeper than any desert sandstorm he'd endured overseas. His boots crunched through the knee-deep snow, each step a battle against a storm that had rolled in unexpectedly. Beside him, Scout, his loyal German Shepherd, moved with purpose, ears pricked, nose low, cutting through the drifts like a ship through waves. They were out here in the middle of nowhere, 20 miles from the nearest town, on a training exercise with the Cedar County Search and Rescue Team. It was supposed to be straightforward. A mock search to keep Scout's skills sharp. Daniel had adopted the dog after his final tour, both of them too restless for civilian life. Scout had sniffed out survivors in war zones, and Daniel, who'd seen more loss than he cared to admit, found solace in the dog's unyielding focus. Together, they joined a volunteer team, combing Iowa's fields and forests for lost hikers, stranded hunters, or occasionally something worse. Tonight, though, was just practice, until Scout stopped dead in his tracks. The cabin loomed ahead, a dilapidated relic from a forgotten farmstead, its roof sagging under the weight of snow. The training route had them passing within 50 yards, but Scout's sudden halt pulled Daniel up short. The dog's hackles rose, a low growl rumbling in his throat as he stared at the cabin's broken windows, black as empty eyes against the weathered wood. "Easy, boy," Daniel murmured, his breath clouding in the frigid air. He tugged the leash, but Scout dug his paws in, refusing to move. His nose twitched, catching a scent Daniel couldn't sense. "Scout, come on." Daniel tried again, his voice firm but laced with unease. The dog wasn't prone to disobedience. In fact, he'd once dragged Daniel through an Afghan rubble pile to find a trapped child. If Scout was as fixated, there was a reason. Daniel's gloved hand rested on the grip of his sidearm, a habit from years in combat zones. He scanned the cabin, its silhouette barely visible through the swirling snow. The wind carried a faint creak of wood, like the structure was groaning under the storm's weight. He radioed base camp, his voice steady despite the growing knot in his gut. "Harper to base." Scouts locked onto something at the old cabin on Ridge Road, requesting permission to investigate. The radio crackled, and Sarah Thornton's voice came through, clipped and professional. She was the team's coordinator, a former attorney turned search and rescue leader after her own brush with tragedy. "Copy, Harper. Proceed with caution. Weather's worsening, don't linger." Daniel clipped the radio back to his belt and gave Scout a nod. "All right, buddy, show me what you've got." The dog surged forward, pulling Daniel toward the cabin with a determination that sent a chill down his spine, unrelated to the cold. The snow was deeper here, swallowing his boots to the shins, and the wind screamed, drowning out all but the crunch of their steps and Scout's eager panting. The cabin's door hung ajar, half buried in a drift. Daniel shone his flashlight through the gap, the beam catching cobwebs and splintered floorboards. The air inside was stale, heavy with the scent of mold, and something sharper, something metallic, like old blood. Scout whined, his ears flattening as he pushed past Daniel, ignoring commands to heel. The dog's nose led him straight to a corner where the floorboards were uneven, warped by years of neglect. Daniel's heart pounded as he followed, his flashlight sweeping the room. The cabin was small, maybe 15 by 20 feet, with a rusted wood stove in one corner and a pile of rotted blankets in another. A single window let in slivers of moonlight, fractured by the storm. Scout pawed at the floor, his claws scraping against the wood, and Daniel knelt beside him, running his gloved fingers over the boards. They were loose, not nailed down, and when he pried one up, the wood came away with a brittle snap. Beneath was a crawl space, shallow and dark, no more than 2 feet deep. The flashlight beam revealed something that made Daniel's breath catch. A small, tattered backpack. Its blue fabric faded but unmistakable. It was a child's size, with a cartoon dinosaur embroidered on the flap. Daniel's mind flashed to the missing persons cases he'd studied with the team, cases that haunted Cedar County. 2 sisters, Nora and Cora Whitfield, had vanished from their family's farm 3 years ago, their roadside egg stand abandoned. The backpack matched the description of Cora's, last seen slung over her shoulder that fateful morning. "Scout, stay," Daniel ordered, his voice tight. The dog sat, but his eyes never left the crawl space. Daniel reached down, his fingers brushing the backpack strap. It was damp, the fabric fraying, but intact enough to hold its contents. He pulled it free, the weight heavier than he expected. His hands shook as he unzipped it, revealing a jumble of items. A crumpled juice box, a small stuffed rabbit, and a child's drawing folded in half. The paper was yellowed, but the crayon lines were vivid. 2 stick figures labeled Nora and Cora, holding hands under a smiling sun. Daniel's throat tightened. He'd seen enough in war to know the signs of something wrong, something final. The backpack wasn't just lost. It had been hidden. He radioed Sarah again, his voice barely above a whisper. "Harper to base. I've got something." Child's backpack matches Cora Whitfield's description, in a crawl space under the cabin floor, requesting immediate backup. Sarah's response was instant. "Copy, Daniel. Stay put. Sheriff Daniels and state police are en route. ETA 20 minutes. 20 minutes felt like an eternity. Daniel sat back on his heels, the backpack cradled in his lap, Scout's warm weight pressed against his side. The storm outside raged on, the wind rattling the cabin's walls. But inside, the silence was suffocating. His mind raced, piecing together fragments of the Whitfield case. The girl's parents, Grace and Garrett, had been hounded by suspicion, their grief twisted into accusations. A mill can found in Cedar Creek had held Nora's remains, but Cora was still missing, a ghost in the county's collective memory. Scout's ears perked up, and he let out a sharp bark, snapping Daniel back to the present. The dog was staring at the far wall, where a rusted metal cabinet leaned against the splintered wood. Daniel stood, his flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. The cabinet was padlocked, the lock old but sturdy. Scout's growls grew louder, his body tense, ready to spring. Daniel's instinct screamed at him to wait for backup, but the dog's urgency was infectious. He grabbed a crowbar from his pack, a tool he always carried for emergencies, and wedged it into the lock. The metal groaned, then snapped with sharp crack. Inside, the cabinet was empty except for a single item, a small weathered shoe, a girl's sneaker, size 3, with pink laces. Daniel's stomach churned. He recognized it from the case files. Cora's shoe, well, the pair she'd been wearing the day she disappeared. The leather was scuffed, the sole caked with dried mud. But there was something else, dark stains that looked suspiciously like blood. Daniel's hands trembled as he placed the shoe in an evidence bag from his pack, his military training kicking in to preserve the scene. Scout whined, nudging Daniel's leg, urging him to keep looking. The dog's nose led him back to the crawl space, where Daniel noticed a faint outline in the dirt, barely visible under the flashlight's beam. He scraped away the soil with a crowbar, revealing a trapdoor, its edges sealed with years of grime. His heart pounded as he pried it open, the hinges screaming in protest. Below was a narrow tunnel, barely wide enough for a man to crawl through, descending into darkness. The air that wafted up was thick with the stench of decay, a smell Daniel knew too well from his years in combat. "Scout, stay," he said again, but the dog ignored him, crawling into the tunnel before Daniel could stop him. Cursing under his breath, Daniel followed, his broad shoulders scraping against the dirt walls. The tunnel sloped downward, the air growing colder and heavier with every inch. His flashlight flickered, the beam struggling against the oppressive darkness. Scout's low growls echoed ahead, guiding him forward. After what felt like an eternity, the tunnel opened into a small, earthen chamber, no bigger than a closet. Scout stood in the center, his fur bristling, staring at a pile of rags in the corner. Daniel's flashlight swept over the scene, and his breath caught in his throat. The rags weren't rags at all, They were clothes, small and tattered, wrapped around something that made his blood run cold. Bones. Small, fragile bones, unmistakably human, curled in a fetal position as if the child had been trying to protect herself from the dark. Daniel's knees buckled, and he sank to the ground, the flashlight slipping from his hand. Scout pressed against him, whimpering as the reality hit. Cora. This had to be Cora Whitfield. Hidden here all these years, her life snuffed out in this cold, forgotten place. Tears stung Daniel's eyes, blurring the grim scene. He'd seen death before, too much of it, but this was different. This was a child, a little girl who trusted the world, only to be betrayed in the worst way. He forced himself to move, to document the scene as best he could with his phone's camera, knowing the police would need every detail. The chamber was bare except for remains and a single, heartbreaking object beside them. A tiny, braided friendship bracelet, the kind a child might make for a sister. The colors were faded, but the knots were tight, a silent testament to a bond that had endured even in death. Daniel's radio crackled, Sarah's voice cutting through the haze. Harper, status? Sheriff's team is 5 minutes out. He swallowed hard, his voice breaking as he responded. Found remains, child-sized, in a hidden chamber under the cabin. It's Cora Whitfield, I think. Send forensics. The line went silent for a moment before Sarah replied, her voice heavy with grief. Copy, Daniel. Stay where you are. Help's coming. Daniel sat in the dark, Scout's warmth the only thing keeping him grounded. The storm outside seemed distant now, its fury no match for the weight of what he'd found. He thought of Grace and Garrett Whitfield, of the years they'd spent hoping, praying, only to face this crushing truth. He thought of his own losses, comrades in war, moments he'd never get back, and the tears came harder, spilling onto the dirt floor. The red and blue lights of police vehicles sliced through the snowstorm as Sheriff Tom Daniels' cruiser skidded to a stop outside the cabin. Daniel stood in the doorway, Scout at his side, the backpack and shoe clutched in evidence bags. His face was streaked with tears, his military composure shattered by the discovery in the chamber below. The sheriff, a grizzled man who'd known the Whitfields for years, took one look at Daniel and understood the gravity of the moment. Show me, Tom said, his voice gruff but kind. Daniel led him to the trapdoor, the beam of his flashlight illuminating the tunnel's entrance. Forensic technicians in white coveralls followed, their faces grim as they descended into the chamber. Daniel stayed above, unable to face the bones again, his stomach churning with the memory of Cora's tiny form. Scout pressed against his leg, sensing his distress, and Daniel scratched the dog's ears, grateful for the anchor. The next hour was a blur of activity. State police arrived, followed by Detective Patricia Chun, who'd worked the Whitfield case 3 years ago when Nora's remains were found. Her sharp eyes took in the scene, her professional demeanor faltering as she emerged from the tunnel, her face pale. It's her, she confirmed quietly to Tom. The bracelet matches the description Grace gave us. We'll need DNA to be certain, but she didn't finish, the weight of the truth too heavy. Daniel overheard, his heart sinking further. He stepped outside, the snow now falling in heavy sheets, blanketing the cabin in an eerie quiet. He sank to his knees, the cold seeping through his pants, and let the tears come again. Scout nudged his face, whining softly, but Daniel couldn't stop. The image of Cora's bones, curled in that dark chamber, haunted him. He'd seen war's brutality, but this was a different kind of evil, one that preyed on the innocent. Detective Chin approached, her boots crunching in the snow. You did good, Harper, she said softly, crouching beside him. Scout led us here. Without him, we might never have found her. Daniel shook his head, wiping his eyes with a gloved hand. Doesn't feel good. That little girl, she deserved better. Chin nodded, her own eyes glistening. We've got a suspect in custody from a Nora case, Walter Brennan, the Whitfield's neighbor. He confessed to taking both girls, keeping Cora alive for a while. We thought he was delusional, claiming she was still out there, but she gestured toward the cabin. This confirms it. He must have moved her here after Nora died. Daniel's mind flashed to the case files he'd studied. Walter Brennan, the trusted neighbor who betrayed the Whitfields in the worst way, hiding Cora in a secret room under his barn. The man had seemed broken during his confession, insisting he'd loved the girls, that he'd been a good father. But this cabin, this hidden chamber, told a different story, one of control, of cruelty, of a man who'd stolen a child's life and discarded her when she became too much trouble. "Why here?" Daniel asked, his voice hoarse. "Why this cabin?" Chen stood, brushing snow from her coat. "It's isolated off the grid. Walter's family-owned land nearby. His grandfather's old hunting cabin. He called it. We searched it years ago, but never found the tunnel. He was meticulous, covering his tracks." Daniel's gaze drifted to the cabin, its walls now crawling with forensic techs. He thought of Walter's confession, how he claimed Cora, whom he called Clara, was happy, educated, cared for. But the truth lay in that chamber, in the bones of a girl who died alone, terrified. Her sister's bracelet her only comfort. Sheriff Daniels joined them, his face etched with exhaustion. "Grace and Garrett are on their way. They need to know, but God help me, I don't know how to tell them." Daniel's heart clenched. He'd never met the Whitfields, but he felt their pain as if it were his own. "I'll stay," he said quietly. They should hear it from someone who found her. Chen and Daniels exchanged a glance, then nodded. An hour later, Grace and Garrett Whitfield arrived, their faces pale and drawn, clinging to each other as they stepped out of their truck. Daniel met them at the cabin's edge, Scout sitting obediently at his side. Grace's eyes locked on the backpack in the evidence bag, and she let out a choked sob, her knees buckling. Garrett caught her, his own face crumpling as he saw the shoe. "That's Cora's," Grace whispered, her voice raw. "My babies." Daniel knelt before them, his voice steady despite the lump in his throat. "I'm Daniel Harper, with Search and Rescue. My dog, Scout, found her. I'm so sorry for your loss." He explained what he'd found, the backpack, the shoe, the chamber, each word careful, measured, but unable to soften the blow. Grace clutched the stuffed rabbit from the backpack, her fingers tracing its worn fur. She loved this bunny, took it everywhere. Garrett's hand rested on her shoulder, his eyes distant, as if seeing a memory only he could access. "Thank you," he said finally, his voice breaking, "for finding her, for giving us answers." The snow kept falling, blanketing the scene in a surreal calm. Forensic techs worked through the night, cataloging every detail of the chamber. They found more evidence. Scraps of paper with Cora's handwriting, a half-eaten granola bar, signs she'd been kept alive for months before her death. Walter's confession, pieced together with this new evidence, painted a chilling picture. He'd moved Cora to the cabin when the searchers got too close, but she'd grown sick like Nora and he couldn't or wouldn't save her. As dawn broke, painting the sky in soft pinks and grays, Daniel stood with Grace and Garrett, watching as the coroner's van carried Cora's remains away. The storm had passed, leaving a world of pristine snow, but the weight of the night lingered. Grace turned to Daniel, her eyes red but resolute. "You and Scout gave us closure," she said. "We can bury our girls together now. That means everything." Daniel nodded, unable to speak, his throat tight with emotion. Scout pressed against his leg, sensing the moment's gravity. As the Whitfields drove away, Daniel sank into the snow once more, his tears freezing on his cheeks. He'd faced death before, but this, finding a child lost to such cruelty, cut deeper than any wound he'd ever known. Climax and call to action. The cabin stood silent now, its secrets laid bare. Daniel's discovery had unraveled a tragedy that had haunted Cedar County for years, giving the Whitfields the answers they prayed for, even if those answers broke their hearts. But for Daniel, the weight of Cora's bones, the sight of her bracelet, would never leave him. He wept not just for her, but for every child lost to the darkness, every family torn apart by monsters hiding in plain sight. As the sun rose over the snow-covered fields, Daniel made a silent vow. He'd keep searching, keep training Scout, keep answering the call of the wilderness. Because somewhere out there, another family was waiting for closure, and he'd be damned if he let them face that pain alone. If this story moved you, join a local search and rescue team or support organizations that help find missing children. Your time, your skills, even your voice can bring someone home. Let's honor Cora and Nora by never giving up on those still lost. Share their story, and let's keep the light of hope burning.